Today I'll show you my game system collection from the 80s. Now, the Atari 2600 remained popular during the 80s, even though it was released in the 70s, as it got many good arcade ports such as Space Invaders. But in 1982, the technology improved a bit, and many companies tried to make systems that were better than the Atari. One of these was the GCE Vectrex, also made by Milton Bradley. Had a very good joystick with arcade-like controls, displayed vector graphics on this monitor that it came built in with the system. It's really part of the system. And you had small cartridges like this, and they would go in the side of the system like that. Now, this is one of the most popular systems from the early 80s. There's still people making homebrew games for it today. We had the Emerson Arcadia. This was the first one of these that came out in 82 or 81. The cartridges are tall. There's some generic games, or they were similar to Intellivision and Atari 2600 games, like Cat Tracks. That game was available for the Atari 2600. The controllers were a lot like Intellivision, except they had a detachable joystick part, so you didn't have to push that. Had a number pad and a single button on the side. There's also the Colecovision by Coleco. This was one of the systems that people liked because it had more accurate arcade ports, like Donkey Kong. Nintendo first licensed Donkey Kong to Coleco, but it was eventually ported onto the Atari 2600 and Intellivision. This system had some of the best graphics of the 1982 systems. Then there was the Atari 5200. Atari advertised how much better the graphics of arcade games like Pac-Man looked on this system than it did with their 2600 system, trying to convince people to buy the superior graphics. Like most systems of the time, came with built-in controller storage spaces. See those little balls there? That's because this joystick has a little slot for it. Many people don't know exactly what that's for, but it's for this controller. These controllers were known for malfunctioning, but if you're lucky, you'll get one that actually does work, and if you're nice to it, take good care of it, it'll stay working. Just don't push anything very hard. Be gentle. Now, as I mentioned in another video, the Milton Bradley Microvision didn't last because companies like Entex in 1982 made very good handheld games that were ports of arcade games. These usually go for a high price on eBay. This one I've seen for up to $40 in very good condition. This one isn't in that great of condition. Entex also made a tabletop system called the Adventure Vision, which is extremely rare, and even the top collectors have trouble finding it. And Tandy, I believe this was a Radio Shack line of handheld games, as their Tandy color computer was made there, sold there. Now the first system of the 80s that really blew all these away was the Nintendo Entertainment System. Superior graphics, new kinds of gameplay and great games like Super Mario Brothers. Everybody knows what a Nintendo is. If you don't, I feel sorry for you. The game goes in the front, which is different. You would push it in and boom. First system to have a control pad instead of a joystick. People loved that, so this was continued to be used on any system afterwards, for the most part. Like the Sega Master System, which came out shortly after, had a similar control pad, just no start and select button. Better diagonals. And it had arcade ports by Sega, like Golden Axe. Sega was known for their arcade business. So when people got a Sega, they were trying to get the arcade games. It's had slightly better graphics than Nintendo, but Nintendo was still more successful in the United States because, well, they advertised well to the mainstream consumers. Sega, I don't remember seeing any commercials. There were very few of them. Now, the Atari 7800 came out a little late. It was made in 1984, but not released until 1986. So, you got games that didn't look as good as Sega or Nintendo games, and they were all arcade ports mostly, like Miss Pac-Man, that you'd find on any of the other Atari systems. Now, the US version came with a joystick controller like this. Just some people didn't like it. In Europe, they came out with a control pad with an optional screw-in joystick. Had to get that because it's far better than the joystick. Although I have learned to use the joystick pretty well. Just have to kind of hold it sideways, I found. Well, not sideways, but, you know, kind of at an angle. After this Atari came out, we waited 3 years from playing Nintendo games till the graphics got even better. 1989, NEC released the TurboGrafx-16. Similar controllers, built-in rapid fire, so you didn't have to buy a separate rapid fire controller if you liked doing that. As this console had lots of shooting games, it was great. It also had RPGs which became popular on the Nintendo, like Legend of Zelda or Dragon Warrior. Utopia is very much like The Legend of Zelda. The games were on cards and they just slid right in there. This console also used add-ons such as a CD player for CD-based games. Also in 1989, the Sega Genesis started. Now, it had arcade games such as the ones that they had for Sega Master System with better graphics, but in the 90s, game Sonic the Hedgehog really made this system popular and stand out. But before that, it had some great arcade ports. It also got a CD add-on later. It has a volume control and headphones. It's nice. 3 buttons instead of 2. It also had a cartridge adapter so you could play Sega Master System games on the Genesis. And the last system to come out in the 90s was a handheld, the Nintendo Game Boy. Much better than the handhelds over there or the Microvision, because it had cool games like Super Mario Land. If you liked playing Nintendo, you'd like playing Game Boy on the go. Now, these are all the systems I have from the 80s. Most of them.